regulars alike. So here at St. Stephen's, we do things differently than many Episcopal churches do, and that is I will give you some thoughts on this morning's gospel, and then I'm going to open it up for conversation, and you guys can share your thoughts and what has moved you this morning or this holiday season. Generally, you know, this whole priest life for me doesn't happen like in a vacuum. I don't come here on Sunday and I'm preaching just on this first Sunday after Christmas, because that's not how it is for me. I am bringing with me all of Advent. And, you know, I don't know how you all did during Advent, but I read some and pray some, and I see stuff on Facebook, and it's, you know, and we talk about this time of darkness and preparation and waiting, you know. And I know theologians say waiting is an action. Part of our spiritual journey is waiting. But I'll tell you, waiting is painful, can often be painful. It can be difficult, it can be challenging. And I want to, in the middle of the darkness and this last, you know, Advent, I wanted to just go over and flip on the light. Please, God, shine the light now, because that is what I need. And that's just not how God works. It's a mystery, you know, God is a mystery. And we go through times of darkness in our lives like we did this past Advent. And because God is full of grace and love and mercy and justice, the light finally comes. It's not without some pain, often. So, I don't know, I'm going to tell you a little story. Maybe it will ring some bells. Maybe some of you have seen it, but here's the story. Woman is pregnant, the father's not around, and she's a little angry about it, and she doesn't really like to leave the house. And her sister's there, and her sister is sort of this conduit to the world. And her sister comes in and is trying to get her to, like, you know, look at this as a joyful occasion. Okay, so the guy's not around and he was a jerk. And maybe you didn't have the greatest upbringing, but here you're bringing life into the world, and it's going to be this amazing, incredible thing. And her sister is loving and supportive and kind, and the woman is just a little angry and resentful and snarky. And the sister takes the woman to the doctor, and they go to the doctor, and they're doing the ultrasound, and the doctor is just this beautiful, grace-filled woman, and she's full of light, and she says to the woman, you know, the woman is not acknowledging really that she's pregnant. She kind of knows that, like, her belly's growing and any minute the baby's going to come, but she wants it to be over with, and she's not really interested in bonding with the baby that's growing in her womb. And so, and the OB knows this and gets this and is like, Mallory, you're going to have a baby, and at some point, you're going to have to acknowledge the reality of that. And Mallory's like, no, she's not going to do that. And then they leave, and all of a sudden, okay, I'm going to tell you this part because it sort of gives you the context of the whole story. All of a sudden, Mallory's sister goes to get the car, and Mallory's heading out from the hospital, and she's walking down the hallway, and she sees this woman next to her that she had passed coming into the hospital room, and the woman is like banging her head on the glass, and it's not a pretty sight. You can imagine. And insanity is unleashed. Chaos, craziness. She goes out into the car. The sister's there in the car. The sister's driving. Any of this sound familiar to anyone? So they're driving away, and now cars are flipping over, and people are running out into the streets in cars, and people are jumping out of buildings. And earlier in the day, when the sister had come to the house, the sister walked in before they were getting ready to leave for the doctor and said, "Oh my God, have you heard the news?" Mallory's, "What? What's going on?" People all over the world are killing themselves. It's total chaos and insanity. Chaos and insanity ensues. The sister doesn't make it, and Mallory does, and she's in this house, and I don't want to give you all the details, and this is just my little spiritual, like, what's going on here? And so this is the upshot. Mallory loses everything. She loses everything. She finds some solace in the house. There is utter chaos and destruction outside in the world. It is the apocalypse, and what has been unleashed is some insane demon that compels people to kill themselves. And Mallory makes it with a few other people, and I don't want to ruin the story for you, but nobody makes it. Mallory makes it. She has the babies. She has a baby. She has one baby. She doesn't name the baby. Another woman in the house, she's pregnant. That woman doesn't make it, but she delivers that baby. Mallory is now the mother of 2 babies, a boy, her own flesh and blood, and a little girl. And the way the circumstances work out, the only way Mallory is going to save these children and herself is if she blindfolds herself and jumps into a boat and heads down the river. She has no compass. She can't see because if the kids and she take the blindfold off, they will be killed. And she does this because there is no other choice. She will die anyway. And she gets into the river, and the river is destructive, and she is faced with demons along the way down the river, and all she's doing is following a voice. One voice, who she heard on the walkie-talkie say, "If you come here, you will be okay." She doesn't even know if the voice is real or true, or if it has any, if there's any sanctuary there. So she gets there. She does it. She gets there, and all the time she says to the kids, "Boy, girl." She never names the children. "Boy, girl, you have to do this. If you don't do this, you're going to die." She doesn't give them love. She doesn't give them compassion. She doesn't shield them from what's going on around them. She doesn't allow them fantasy or imagination because she's terrified. Because she's terrified that if she does, her heart will just break again. She makes it. I mean, I'm totally spoiling it for you, and you can watch it on Netflix. It's called Bird Box. And she makes it into the sanctuary, to this place, and she follows the sounds of the birds, because the birds are their signal to the destruction outside if it comes close. And in this sanctuary are all these children laughing. And Mallory comes in, and it's a school for the blind, because the blind couldn't see the destruction, the evil around them, so they don't die. And so Mallory comes with her children, and out of the crowd of people, her doctor. And her doctor says, "You made it, Mallory." 5 years later, because the children are 4 or 5. This is your child, and you have another child. What are their names? And she says, of course I can't remember, but she names them. Tom, her lover, and she names the daughter after the daughter's mother. I meant to look that up. She names them, and she begins to weep, because inside she has gone, and it's all a metaphor for her own journey of darkness and fear and resentment and the wall that we build up as human beings to keep each other distant, separate, so that we don't risk, so that we don't get hurt, so that we are not made vulnerable. We don't have to connect. And Mallory finally is willing to take on that risk, connecting with herself, with these children, to really, truly love them. And I tell you this story in the context of today's reading because here God is. And I hear myself talk oftentimes, and I really can't believe the words that come out of my mouth. And I say this over and over again because if you had asked me 10 years ago, would I be speaking in front of you as an ordained priest, I'm newly ordained last January, I'm coming up on a year, and say what I'm about to say. And that is God birthed into the vulnerable life of a baby at a time when to a woman who was not really old enough to take care of him, and to a man who's like, what the heck is going on? And I really hope Mary is right about all this. And God entrusts God's self to these human beings and lives among us as a human being, flesh and blood, pain and suffering. And I was talking to my partner this morning, and we were just conversing about this reality of the life of Jesus, who was born to us. And it wasn't like a bowl full of cherries. Jesus suffered. In the Gospel of John, we get to hear who John experienced Jesus as. And Jesus tells us in John, I am the way, I am the light, I am the bread, I am the vine, I am the way, the truth, the life. I am the light to the world. In the other Gospels, we get the story. We get the parables, right? We get the lessons and the readings, and we get the Hebrew scriptures in Matthew and Mark and Luke. We get the angry Jesus who is really frustrated, and we get the disciples who don't know what's going on. But in John, we get a truth that we are only introduced to in John. That the light of the world, the light of God is born into the world. And our job as human beings is to dig deep and uncover that light. You know, we've been reading Greg Boyle, Tattoos on the Heart. And it was just, it's a beautiful book, and if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it, as does Father Jamie. And Greg Boyle says, social justice doesn't necessarily change the world. He didn't set out to be a social justice advocate. He just wanted to help these people, right? He wanted to help these gang members who were, one thing, in the late 80s, 90s, were just being brutally murdered. They were brutally murdering each other all over Boyle Heights in East LA. And he realized he can't really help them. But what he can do is be the face of God for them. Because what he walked into was a community of people who did not know their worth, their value, their light. They couldn't uncover their light because people had buried the people that raised them or didn't raise them. Society, culture tells them, you are nothing, you are worthless. There is nothing of value, and so we're not going to invest time, money, love, energy into you. And Greg Boyle comes in and says, well, that's not true. And he does this extraordinary feat of changing a community, one person at a time. So Jesus wasn't born to us in a palace, and I know it's so elementary. It seems so obvious, but over and over I have to remind myself, Jesus wasn't born in a palace to a king or a queen. Jesus is not the king of the world. Jesus is the light of the universe. Our job is to empty ourselves enough in order to become that light for others. And like Mallory in the story, we might have to get in that river, blindfolded, with no guide, and paddle along the best we can, and pray and hope and trust that God is there. And eventually, we will meet the light in the darkness. Amen. Wow, I didn't say anything I was going to say.